They thought their money gave them
You should
power.
all be
They
ashamed of
laughed at the
yourselves.
housekeeper, mocked
She
her,
works harder
and
than
treated her
any of
like she
you,
was
and
nothing.
you treat her
But
like
what the
this.
billionaire's daughter said next, it silenced the entire room and changed everything. Don't serve that food. It's made by her. One of the billionaire's friends sneered, pointing toward the Filipino housekeeper, who stood silently in the corner. The laughter around the long-polished dining table grew louder, sharper, cutting through her dignity. She lowered her eyes, her hands trembling, as if she were guilty of something she never did. But just as the humiliation deepened, a young voice cut through the noise. It wasn't soft and it wasn't hesitant. It carried fire. The guests were all billionaires, people of status, people who wore arrogance like an expensive suit. They believed their wealth gave them the right to insult, to mock, and to belittle. What they didn't expect, what no one in that lavish penthouse expected, was that the host's teenage daughter would stand up, her chair scraping loudly against the marble floor, ready to say something that would change everything. And when she finally spoke, her words didn't just silence the room. They would soon stun the entire world. The evening had started like any other high society gathering. Crystal chandeliers glowed above. The finest champagne was poured into glasses, and the chatter of business deals and vacations in Dubai filled the air. On the surface, it was elegance, but beneath that shine, prejudice lurked like a shadow. The housekeeper, Maria, had worked for the family for nearly 12 years. She was more than just help. She was part of the home. She had wiped the daughter's tears when she scraped her knees, stayed up late helping with school projects, and whispered prayers when the girl was sick. But to the father's guests, Maria was invisible, or worse, a target. It began subtly. A guest leaned over, sniffed his glass, and muttered, "Hope she washed her hands before touching this." Another chimed in, "I don't eat anything made by them." They didn't say Filipino, but their eyes. Their tone carried the poison. A cruel chuckle rolled around the table, making Maria freeze mid-step. The billionaire himself, busy bragging about his new tech acquisition, didn't notice. Or maybe he didn't want to. He kept talking, pretending the insults weren't happening right under his roof. His silence spoke louder than the words his friends hurled. But the daughter noticed. Every word felt like a knife slicing through her chest. She had grown up watching Maria sacrifice, watching her work endless hours without complaint. Maria wasn't just a housekeeper. She was family. And now family was being mocked in the ugliest way. The daughter's fists clenched beneath the table. Her throat burned with unspoken words, her heart pounding so loud she feared others could hear it. She wanted to scream, but she waited, watching the scene unfold. And then one guest leaned back smirking and said, "Maybe the cat should eat first, just in case." The laughter that followed was cruel, heartless, echoing through the marble halls like a curse. That was it. That was the breaking point. The daughter's chair scraped back, the sound slicing through the noise, pulling every eye to her. The room went silent. No one expected what would come next. The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. Forks froze midair. Glasses hovered just inches from lips. Every eye in the room turned to the daughter, expecting perhaps a polite excuse, maybe a silly teenage outburst. But her face carried no confusion, no hesitation, only anger and pain mixed into one storm. Her voice trembled at first, but it was steady enough to slice through the arrogance. "Do you hear yourselves?" she demanded. Her words echoed off the marble walls. "Do you even realize what you're saying?" She, the daughter, pointed at Maria, "is the reason half of you are even sitting here tonight enjoying this meal." The guests blinked in shock. One man snorted, trying to laugh it off, but the girl pressed on. "While you sit here bragging about your private jets and your island homes, she's been the one making sure our home even runs. She's the one who raised me when my parents were too busy. She's the one who taught me more about kindness than any of you ever could." The billionaire's friends shifted uncomfortably, their arrogance cracking under her words. Some tried to smirk, but their eyes betrayed guilt. The father coughed nervously, muttering, "Sweetheart, sit down. Don't make a scene." But his daughter didn't move. Instead, her voice grew louder. "A scene? No, Dad. The scene was when your friends mocked the woman who has done more for me than they ever will. The scene is when you all laughed like her dignity didn't matter, like she didn't matter. The housekeeper stood frozen, her eyes wide, hands still clutching the tray. Tears welled, but she tried to blink them away. She had endured years of silent insults, quiet slights, and whispered remarks. But never had someone defended her so fiercely. And just as the weight of the moment pressed down, the daughter said something that made the entire room hold its breath. The girl's chest rose and fell quickly, her voice ringing with the kind of truth that cannot be ignored. She didn't glance at her father, didn't care for the shocked stares. Her eyes locked on the very people who had laughed seconds ago. "You sit here pretending to be powerful because of your money," she said, her voice breaking just enough to show her heart. "But power isn't measured in how much you own. It's measured in how you treat the people who have less than you. And tonight, you've all shown me how weak you really are." A murmur spread across the table. Some of the guests lowered their eyes, shame beginning to creep in where arrogance once lived. Others frowned, unwilling to admit fault. One guest shifted uncomfortably and whispered, "She's just a housekeeper, dear." That was the moment the daughter snapped. She's not just anything. She's Maria. She's a human being. She has a story, a family, dreams, just like you. Just like me. The room fell silent again. Maria's hands trembled harder now, the tray almost slipping from her grasp. She had never heard someone defend her like this, not with such raw emotion, not in front of people who believed themselves untouchable. The father's face flushed red. He looked torn between pride and embarrassment, his lips pressed into a thin line, but for once he said nothing. The girl continued, her voice lowering, but every word carried weight. "If this is what it means to be rich, to have friends who laugh at kindness and spit on dignity, then I want no part of it. Maria has given me more love than money ever could. And if you can't see that, then maybe you're the ones who don't belong here tonight." Gasps echoed around the table. Some guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, while others suddenly looked as though their appetite had vanished. But the daughter wasn't finished. She had one last truth to deliver, one that would echo far beyond the walls of that penthouse. The atmosphere in the penthouse had shifted. What was once a night of luxury now felt like a courtroom where the guilty had been exposed. No one touched their food. The expensive champagne sat untouched, its sparkle lost under the weight of truth. The daughter's voice cracked with raw emotion as she turned to Maria. "You've carried me through my hardest moments. When I failed my exam in school, you told me failure didn't define me. When Mom and Dad fought, you held me so I wouldn't cry alone. You've been more family to me than anyone sitting at this table tonight." Maria's lips parted, her chest heaving, tears finally spilling freely down her cheeks. She had endured so much, swallowed so much pain, but those words broke her walls. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. She wasn't just the housekeeper. She was seen. The guests fidgeted in their seats. Some had the decency to look ashamed. Others stubbornly crossed their arms, unwilling to accept the rebuke of a teenager. One muttered, "Kids these days think they know everything." The daughter's eyes snapped toward him, her glare sharp enough to silence him instantly. "No," she said firmly. "We don't know everything, but we know enough to recognize cruelty when we see it." Her father finally stood, trying to regain control of the evening. "That's enough," he barked, his voice firm. "Apologize to our guests." But the daughter didn't flinch. Instead, she turned to him, her voice breaking with disappointment. "No, Dad. You should apologize to her." She pointed at Maria, who stood frozen, tears streaming down her face. The entire table gasped. The mighty billionaire called out in his own home, not by an enemy, but by his own daughter. And for a moment, even he had no words. The father's jaw tightened, his pride wounded in front of his friends. He had always been the man in control, the voice that ended arguments with a single command. But tonight his daughter had flipped the script, and everyone knew it. The room seemed to hold its breath. Maria stood like a statue, unsure if she should leave, unsure if she had the right to stay. Her hands trembled so much that the silver tray rattled softly, echoing in the silence. Finally, one of the guests coughed, trying to break the tension. "Come now, we didn't mean anything by it. Just jokes, really." The daughter turned on him like fire. "A joke? You think racism is a joke? You think tearing someone down because of where they're from is funny?" She shook her head slowly. "You all laugh because you've never had to live it. You've never had to carry the pain of being treated less than human. But she has, and still she stands with more dignity than any of you." Her words hit like thunder. For the first time, several guests lowered their heads in shame. Maria's eyes glistened, her lips trembling. She whispered softly, "Anna Ko." But her voice cracked before she could finish. The father looked at his daughter, then at Maria. For the first time, his hardened expression softened. He saw what his daughter saw, the woman who had sacrificed, who had given so much and asked for nothing in return. "Maria," he finally spoke, his voice quieter, heavier than before. I'm sorry. It wasn't much, but it was something." And then the daughter turned back to the table, her voice stronger than ever. "If you came here tonight to laugh at people, to feel powerful by making others small, then you're not welcome in this house anymore." Gasps erupted again. The friends who once thought themselves untouchable suddenly realized they had been dismissed by a teenage girl with the courage to stand up. No one touched their forks again that night. The dinner, the champagne, the carefully prepared dishes, it all sat untouched, forgotten under the weight of what had just happened. But what the guests didn't know was that one of the servers, quietly standing in the back, had recorded the entire moment on their phone. The fiery speech, the trembling voice, the tears rolling down Maria's cheeks, it was all captured. By morning, the clip had exploded across the internet. Millions watched as the daughter of a wealthy man stood up against racism at her own father's table. The video spread across platforms, gathering headlines. "Billionaire's daughter defends Filipino housekeeper against racist guests." Comments poured in. "This girl has more courage than the entire room of adults combined." Another wrote, "Maria deserves the world. Protect her at all costs." The father's reputation took a hit. But something else happened too. People began to see Maria not as the housekeeper, but as a symbol of quiet strength. Neighbors came to her with respect. Strangers sent letters of love, and the world began to know her name. And through it all, the daughter stayed by her side, refusing to let the world forget who the real hero was. Weeks later, Maria walked through the same penthouse, but something had changed. She wasn't invisible anymore. She wasn't just someone who carried trays and cleaned up after dinners. She was respected, honored, even cherished. The father, once too proud to speak, now often sat with her, asking questions, listening to her stories. The daughter's courage had forced him to see what he had ignored for too long. That wealth means nothing without humanity. As for the guests, many of them never returned. Some reached out with apologies. Others stayed silent, ashamed. But it didn't matter. What mattered was that the truth had been spoken and the world had listened. Maria smiled more now. She walked taller, her eyes no longer cast down, and every time she looked at the daughter, she whispered a prayer of thanks. Not for the fame, not for the recognition, but for being seen. Truly seen. The daughter's words had done more than defend a housekeeper. They had reminded the world that dignity is not for sale. That kindness is stronger than arrogance. And that courage, even from a teenage girl, can change everything. The end. Like if you believe in standing up for what's right. Subscribe for more powerful stories. Comment, respect, if Maria deserves dignity. How did this story touch your heart? Let us know in the comments. And if you watched until the end, write the word complete so we know our true supporters.